This is a special edition of Beyond the Mask. Dr. Betty Horton passed away during the final week of 2025. To honor her legacy, we're revisiting a special episode from the summer of 2020, in which she helped bring to life the story of how nurse anesthetists took their first steps towards standardized education and a formal approval process nearly a century ago. You'll first hear reflections from Jackie Rawls and Sandy Ouellette, who share their thoughts on the impact Betty Horton had and the powerful force for change she represented. That's followed by Sharon and Jeremy's conversation with Betty herself.
Hi, it's Jackie Rawls, former AANA president of the International Federation of Nurse Anesthetists, and president of Our Hearts, Your Hands Incorporated, a global anesthesia support community that provides grants and scholarships for nurse anesthetists in Africa for education. Today, we want to celebrate, recognize the exceptional life and legacy of Betty Horton. Betty loved family, service, and definitely nurse anesthesia. She was an inspiration and role model to so many. To me, she was a friend, a mentor, a supporter, a wise counsel, and like a second mother. She had pivotal roles within the AANA, COA, and IFNA. In IFNA, she was chair of the Education Committee and was the brainchild for our International Anesthesia Program Approval Process, affectionately called APAP, which looks at and audits nurse anesthesia education programs globally. Over the last decade, she served as secretary of Our Hearts, Your Hands, and she was amazing in keeping us on task, finding great opportunities for us to help nurse anesthetists, and just being a motivator and innovator. Beyond all her titles and her honors, she will be remembered as being such a mentor to so many people. And through her influence, her work will live on. Betty, I know that you're up in heaven with the angels. I'm sure that you're writing new standards, and I'm hoping and praying that someday the rest of us will be able to get into heaven meeting those new standards that you've written. You'll always be with the angels, Betty, and you'll always be in our hearts.
This is Sandy Ouellette from the Beyond the Mask historical series. Dr. Betty Horton, CRNA, passed away on December 27, 2025. Before we re-air today's episode, which originally aired July 2nd in 2020, we want to pause and remember that the voice you are about to hear belongs to a woman whose impact on nurse anesthesia spans generations. This conversation was recorded at a time when Dr. Horton, as always, focused not on her own legacy, but on lifting others, strengthening our profession, and building pathways for those who would follow. Listening now, her words carry even greater meaning. They reflect the wisdom, humility, and steady leadership that define her life's work. We invite you today to listen not only with your ears, but with your heart, with gratitude for the doors she opened, the bridges she built, and the calm she brought to moments of uncertainty. It is our honor to share her voice once more. Before we begin, I would like to highlight just 3 examples of Betty's extraordinary contributions. First, the AANA and its Council on Accreditation entity. Dr. Horton became the director of the Council on Accreditation during the time when my husband Richard served as AANA president. Tensions were high following previous political misadventures between AANA and 2 of the credentialing entities. Betty had a rare ability to bring calm to troubled waters. She brought AANA and CONA onto the same page, ensuring the appropriate autonomy of CONA while working collaboratively with AANA leadership to maintain quality assurance in nurse anesthesia educational programs. Second, her global impact through the International Federation of Nurse Anesthetists, known as IFNA. At the 1997 IFNA World Congress in Vienna, Austria, keynote speaker Dr. Marjorie Lynn Peace presented a 5-step plan for the globalization of a profession. IFNA by then had accomplished 4 of those 5 steps. The 5th, being the most difficult, seemed out of sight, and that was quality assurance and nurse anesthesia program accountability. Leadership turned to Dr. Betty Horton, who became chair of the IFNA Education Committee. By 2010, the year that I stepped down as president of IFNA, the anesthesia program approval process, known as APAP, was launched. To our knowledge, it remains the only program of its kind in the world. APAP allows anesthesia programs globally to apply for a level of approval, and there's 3 levels that one can apply for. It succeeded where others failed because Betty understood that progress globally requires meeting people where they are, recognizing strengths and weaknesses, encouraging upward mobility, and committing to lifelong improvement. Third, our hearts, your hands. Dr. Horton was one of 5 founding members of the board of directors of Our Hearts, Your Hands, the charitable organization founded by Dr. Jackie Rawls, former president of ANA and current president of IFNA. Serving as secretary and our administrative anchor, she played a critical role in advancing its mission to provide technology, education, academic support, or continuing education for nurse anesthetists to low and middle income countries. Much of Our Heart, Your Hands success can be attributed to Betty's sharp intellect, organizational skill, and quiet dedication. As Our Hearts, Your Hands begins its 10-year anniversary this year in January 2026, her influence is woven deeply throughout its foundation. These 3 examples represent only a small portion of the reach of this remarkable woman. Betty was quiet and gentle, yet she possessed the rare gift of transforming chaos into calm and bringing people together for the common good. A mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, educator, mentor, and cherished friend to many, she will be deeply missed. We honor her life by striving in our own small way to emulate the values and accomplishments she embodied over decades of service to our profession. Rest in peace, my friend.
Well, we have some wonderful guests with us today, and we have, I think, a really good topic for our listeners here.
Oh, another one for our historical series. And, we get great feedback about these podcasts we're doing in the historical series. So I'm super excited about today.
Yeah, I hear it from, our more seasoned CRNAs who like to hear this message again, but we're also hearing it from our listenership who is not quite as seasoned than the younger CRNAs out there who really enjoy hearing this stuff that maybe they didn't get as much of it when they were in nurse anesthesia school as they probably wanted to. So, but we're going to be talking about today the story of nurse anesthesia education and accreditation. And we have 2 amazing guests with us today. We have Miss Betty Horton. Welcome, Betty.
Hi. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and we have Mike Kramer. Hi, Mike.
Howdy.
Yeah, so you guys have pretty impressive resumes. I'll kind of hit the highlights here for you, Betty. I mean, you served as COA Director in Accreditation from 1990 to 2002. You're also a Program Director, Teacher, and Practitioner. I think you're still a consultant to COA, right?
Yes, that's right.
And also IFNA. So anything else you want to add to that?
No, not really, but it seems that the older I get, the more interested I am in history. So I'm really anxious to share some of those stories today.
Wonderful. We're looking forward to hearing them. And Mike, you also, you've been a CRNA practitioner, teacher, program director. Currently, you're a professor at Rush University. Gosh, you've got quite a storied background as well.
Yeah, and appreciate the introduction, and am so grateful for 40 years in this field and having had a chance to do everything from open drop ether to running a high-tech simulation lab now.
Wow, isn't it amazing?
Well, that's quite the transition, isn't it? From one end of the spectrum to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, we'll call you a wealth of knowledge because you've seen the full transition of nurse anesthesia education and even practice. So.
Well, let's just jump right in here, Jeremy. What do you say?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So, Betty, why was there ever any interest in starting an approval process for the schools of nurse anesthesia?
That's something interesting that we were able to find essentially evidence of as we did this research project, Mike and I, for the council. And it seems that it's pretty well known that nurses were giving anesthesia since the late 1800s, but there was a wide variety of how they learned. A lot of it was on the job training. We did find a few schools, I think there were 4 or 5 that started very early in the 1900s, but it just seemed to be the quality of the education varied widely. And there was also a period of time when Agatha Hodgins, the founder, realized that this was a problem, that we needed to kind of standardize our accreditation or our approval of school so that for patient safety, if nothing else. And also scholars or people that are interested in history know about the other issue that was going on in the early part of that century, which were the legal challenges against nurse anesthetists saying that they shouldn't be giving anesthesia. One other thing about that I realized when we were looking at this, Mike and I, that I hadn't, was the environment they were living in. And of course, they were in the Deep Depression, and physicians were looking at other ways to supplement some kind of income. And so they were looking at anesthesia. So that was kind of the basis of the stimulus. But Agatha realized that we had to get on the ball because of the quality of education and their challenges. So she certainly carried it through.
Now, wasn't Helen Lamb's the mother of education? So Helen had a piece in that whole process too, did she not?
She did, but she came in around in the 40s. So this was
okay.
This would have been, a decade earlier.
Right.
He had a big part of the approval process. Mike, I know that we were really impressed when we were looking through some of the archives documents that we could actually see documents signed by these people. I mean, there were actually the papers they were touching and signing, and just really an impressive thing to go to the ANA archives. Didn't you feel that way, Mike?
For sure. And, having been an on-site reviewer, was interesting to see that, some of the kinds of questions that they were answering to verify and clarify what schools were doing back then were pretty similar to questions that reviewers today deal with when it comes to resources, student learning opportunities, and control of the program. But it was very inspiring to see it in, like Betty saying, the actual handwriting of some of our founders.
Hey, Mike, what was really involved in planning an accreditation process, and who were some of the folks that were really leaders in this movement?
Gertrude Fife at the 1934 annual meeting really took the lead, I think, from Agatha Hodgins and some of the other founders. And by 1937, I believe they had a list of 17 approved programs around the country. And the interesting thing back then is that graduating from an approved program was tied to membership in NANA and later AANA. So before we had our certification process in 1945, the thing that was valued about graduating from an approved program was being eligible to be a member of the AANA. So I think for our younger listeners, please remember what a privilege it is to be a member of an organization with such a strong history of advocacy and pushing forward educational standards.
Absolutely. And we're still seeing that today, right?
Wow. That is totally interesting. Too bad we can't go back to that. And you have to be a member to be a CRNA.
Agreed.
Our membership numbers wouldn't be dropping now, would they?
No way.
That is really an interesting part of our history. Mike, do you remember we talked a bit about the challenge before these nurses, our ancestors in the profession? When they started, when Agatha and Gertrude started, they had no idea where the schools were. They wanted to prove them, but they didn't know where they were. And of course, some of them were just springing up overnight just to fill a need. So they did that survey, and that's how they found those 17 that they said were qualified to have ANA membership.
And they were very strategic in their thinking. And sorry, I stepped on you there, Sharon, but I think aligning with the American Hospital Association, American College of Surgeons was a way of marshaling expertise from others and political support, because as Betty was saying, the doctors were looking for other ways, understandably looking for other ways to earn a living during the Depression. So, and our meetings, our association meetings, that were held in concert with the AHA for a number of years, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Well, Betty, exactly when did we start approving nurse anesthesia schools, and what was that process? And if you could go on and tell us a little bit more about, has the way that we approve schools changed from the beginning? So give us the beginning and then how it's different now.
Right. Well, Sharon, there was really a struggle to get the approval of schools off the ground. They knew very early they wanted to do it, but there were just so many things that came in the way. Funding, lack of funding. The American Hospital Association had helped them and said that they should accredit their own programs, which made sense, but they didn't have any money to do it. And then there was the conflicts. World War II came along, and that really kind of held it up. Although just before that, they had assembled an approval committee. And again, they would look at documents that would come in and see if they're qualified again for AANA membership. But it wasn't until 1952 that they really appointed what they called the Approval Schools Committee. And that was the predecessor of the Council on Accreditation. And that they did a huge amount of work. I swear they couldn't be doing as much as the council does when it reviews a program now. I mean, we would see on the record when Mike and I were doing this that they might approve 108 schools or something like that. So it was, and do 16 or 17 or 18 on-site visits. So they did a lot of work. But it wasn't until 1955 that the U.S. Office of Education actually recognized them as an official agency.
1955. That's not been that long ago.
No, it really hasn't been at all.
Wow. I did not know that either.
Has it changed since then? You alluded to the amount of work then and now. So has the process changed much since 1955?
Well, as I look back at history, it's kind of interesting that the basic elements were there from the beginning. And again, that was because they sought external help. They went to the experts. They didn't just make it up themselves. So if you look at how it was structured, it was very akin to what other people were doing at the time. And now it's very formalized, primarily because of that thing that they did in 55, which was to get approval from the government. They did that, I don't know if you know, but they did that because they were trying to make themselves officially recognized so that people coming back from war, the soldiers, sailors, whoever they were, would be eligible for funds to go to school. And they couldn't do that if their accreditation agency wasn't recognized. So that's how it started. But today it is very formal. A lot of the things that I did as director of accreditation, they do today, is dictated by the government and private organizations. So it's very formal, but I've sat on several other boards of accreditors, and I think they do an excellent job in nurse anesthesia. They're serious about what they do. And if you're an accredited program, I think they should be very proud of that.
But you talked about funding at one point, and I know being AANA past president, a large part of their funding comes from the AANA. So they don't have to worry about that piece anymore, hopefully.
Well, way back when they started this, the members voted to take a part of the dues, just a few dollars. I don't remember. I think the dues were like $20, and they took a portion of that was dedicated, had to go to the schools. So that had to go to the approval process. And council has never gotten big enough to support itself and still, abide by all of the regulations they have to abide by. So they still rely on an unrestricted grant from the AANA to exist. Programs pay, but it still takes money from the professional organization. It's a very good alliance, and it still meets the requirements that you shouldn't be too close to the professional organization. They see that as a conflict of interest, but it works well.
Hey, Mike, how have the requirements or standards, I guess, for education of SRNAs, CRNAs changed over the years? And if you can just talk a little bit about maybe the impact they've had on education and practice. Obviously I believe a certificate was the first degree awarded, correct?
That's right. And in the 30s, we had 4-month programs that still had some required didactic and clinical requirements. And then, the program length ramped up to 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months. And the change in degree requirements, I remember hearing John Gard describe lively assembly of school faculty back in the 70s, where a program director was up at the microphone and said it would be the ruination of this profession if program directors were required to have a baccalaureate degree. And it was less than 10 years after that our entry to practice moved from certificate to bachelor's, even though the requirement moved, even though programs many had made that move. And then by 1998, we had the master's as the requirement, even though there were programs that had already chosen to move to the master's level. And of course, now by 2022, we're mandated to offer a practice doctorate for entry to practice. And we were the first advanced practice specialty to do that, even though there was significant pressure from the American Association of Colleges of Nursing for all advanced practice to move to the DNP by 2015. We were the group, I think, that studied it the most rigorously and decided that, well, if that's the way education and practice are moving, then we'll do it. But as Sandy Marie said, we will chart our own course and sail our own ship. And that was what we ended up doing.
Hey, Mike, along the way, have nurse anesthetists kind of led in the nursing arena, would you say?
I would. I'm biased, but I think so, Jeremy, because even though nursing has an incredible, strong history going back hundreds of years, I think the whole idea of knowing your value and being reimbursed for your services and having direct reimbursement under Medicare Part B, on the practice and regulatory side was important. But I think we took the bull by the horns also in terms of standardizing our education and accreditation the way we did. And the National League for Nursing, I think, started accrediting schools of nursing in the late 30s. But as far as the specialties go, like Betty was saying, it was in the 50s that we were the first specialty group in nursing to have that. And then it was 30 years later in the early 80s that the midwives then had their own process that was also federally recognized.
Interesting. We've always led. I like that. But, you brought up another point, Mike. It was this whole DMP process was driven by the American College of Nursing. It wasn't internally driven from us, and our members sometimes do not realize that. But, we jumped on the train whenever this came out and everybody else dropped off. They all jumped off the train and we stayed on it all the way to the station.
And we had representation for sure with the AACN task forces that were meeting, and that was great. But they had an executive director named Polly Bednash, who was a master marketer and really made it sound like, there was no stopping this movement. And even Ed Thompson, who was our representative with the AACN and very strong representative for nurse anesthesia with that group. But I remember, in his slide deck, when he would be presenting on this, he had an image of the train leaving the station. But it's interesting how the other specialty organizations in nursing held back a bit.
Well, Betty, you talked just a moment ago about seeking external approval for our accreditation, and you alluded to the part of how it started after World War II so that you could get funding, I guess, to be able to go back to school when the GIs and everybody was coming back. Is there another reason why we would have sought external approval for our accreditation?
Well, I think, of course, just to validate that what we were doing is right. But soon after we did that, there were challenges to our right to accredit. And one thing about nurse anesthetists, it seems like we're strong people. We don't want to give up what we've got, and we do hang in there. But there was a challenge before the U.S. Department of Education. There was the Office of Education at that time by an ad hoc committee of the ASA that wanted to essentially, in the documents we have read, to take over accreditation. There was a particular position that was very, very much for that, and actually went to the U.S. Department of Education and said that it was really an old boys network. It was a professional organization, conflicts of interest. We didn't meet the new requirements to be an accreditor. And of course, the ANA, as soon as we heard about that, were right on it. And what happened was they realized that with the new requirements from the government, they had to make some changes. So Ira Gunn, bless her heart, she was always coming to our rescue, it seems like, at that period of time, was appointed as the consultant to create the councils. And she did that structure to keep them separate, but yet part of the AANA. So that's how that started. And eventually, I was just talking to Michael Booth, who was chair of the Council on Accreditation, the second chair. I think he came on and he was on it the whole time as education committee chair, and then became chair of the council in 77 after they had that challenge in 75 by the ad hoc committee. And he said that he was really worried because they were giving us such a hard time, the first chair, Celestine Harrigan. So he decided, along with the council, that they were going to invite the doctors to the meeting. So what they did was invite the doctors to the meeting. And he said they came in and he started the meeting and he said, I've got to do something. So he started it with a prayer. So he made everybody pray. And then they went on. And what they found out was the doctors, I think, were kind of softened up by that. And they said, well, what we really want is for you to be autonomous from the professional organization. So they went to the board and asked for that autonomy, and they did, within a year, were granted enough autonomy. They have autonomy in everything except finances. They have to have autonomy in. So anyway, that's pretty much, it was that challenge. And we've had other challenges, internal and external, since that time, but that challenge really was part of why the councils came about and had to do with the U.S. Department of Education.
Yeah, Mike, have there been other challenges throughout the accreditation history?
I think that the challenge from organized medicine for sure is a big one, and I believe that it's unfortunate in a way because we even did back in the 30s reach out to the anesthesiologists, and back then they said that they weren't interested in helping train technicians or validating the training of technicians. So at least we got a little more traction with the surgeons. And then I think another challenge came when Bernice Baum, who was associate director for many years and then executive director for a few years in the 70s, testified at a Senate committee in DC. And this was before we had the kind of outcomes research that we've had for the last 10 or so years. And Ms. Baum said that our outcomes were comparable to those that the physicians achieved, and that we really didn't need their involvement in having approval of our education. So that ignited a firestorm as well. I would say the most recent challenges that I'm aware of, at least, have been more internal, because going back many years, as Betty indicated, and throughout the years since council has existed, there have been efforts made to examine financial self-sufficiency, and there really isn't a way to do that without becoming cost prohibitive to our programs. But as a council member myself in the sort of, I would say, well, it was the 2010 to 2012 era when we were defunded in terms of the AANE grant, that was extraordinarily challenging. And we, at the same time, were unable to get financial reports from AANA because of turnover in the finance area. But we persevered, and we engaged with consultants, and we worked really hard to determine how we could work more efficiently and how we could better communicate our value to our members. And I think with a lot of help, we were successful in doing that.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question real quick, and members ask about this a lot. There's an anesthesiologist that serves on the COA. Now, I know that his wife is a CRNA, but wasn't that mandated during the challenge back in the 70s from the ASA that an anesthesiologist serves on there? Or am I mistaken?
Yeah, I can address that. Part of the structure of the council and another thing that the anesthesiologists wanted that I didn't mention was they wanted equal representation on the council. If they couldn't have their own group, and they did try, I mean, they had started a faculty of nurse anesthesia, whatever, FNAS. As a matter of fact, I was a brand new program director when that started in the 70s, and I got a call from an anesthesiologist in Chicago, well known, that was organizing this group, and he wanted me to be part of it. Well, I was naive, and I thought, I'll think about it and call you back. Well, by the time I talked with people, I called him back, or he called me, I can't recall. And I said, no, I'm not interested. And I remember he was kind of huffy about that. But anyway, that was part of their trying to challenge us, or they were challenging us, but they settled for equal representation on the council, which they didn't quite get equal, but they got 3, I believe it was anesthesiologists seats, maybe 4. And over the years, that has declined. To my knowledge, have they added one to the council? Because they were all, the last one, actually there were 3 when I became director in 1990. And by the time I left, we didn't have any. We did have some on-site visitors, but even the doctors supported not being on it. They said, well, it was our council, we should have it. But that's how it happened, that we had doctors on the council. They weren't involved before.
Hey, Mike, for a minute, I want to go back to...
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, for a minute, I want to go back to something you alluded to earlier with some of the challenges. From what I've heard from Sandy and Betty Petrie and a lot of people who've been around the industry for a long time, was your physician colleagues basically tried to shut the schools down at a certain point. And, a lot of our listeners are younger and might not even know about that part of the history. And I just think if we don't understand history, we're doomed to repeat it. So can we talk about that, and maybe how has that process changed to where the physician colleagues might not have as much power as they did back then?
Great question. And I think somebody who we alluded to earlier, John Adriani from New Orleans, was somebody who had been a pretty strong supporter of nurse anesthetists and nurse anesthesia education. And then I think as councils formed and as efforts started, I think even back in the 70s, to move toward direct reimbursement under Medicare Part B, that control issue became more pronounced as we were really became bona fide economic competitors with our physician counterparts. So it's probably not coincidental that the formation of the anesthesiologist assistant programs then started taking off in the 70s and, didn't gain as much market share, still haven't gained the amount of market share that some thought they would. But I believe a lot of that tension is based on the economic factor and us being direct economic competitors.
I completely agree with you, Mike. Coming from my background and just kind of seeing it, this whole fight obviously boils down to money, and we all know that. And I think the quality of care that a CRNA administers compared to a physician colleague it's been shown over and over that there literally is no difference in most cases anyway. So, but yeah, I totally agree with you. I look at this and, again, history does tend to repeat itself. And I was just making sure that there were some safeguards in place that this potentially might not be able to happen again. I know that they control some of what the students are doing, and I know that they wield that control whenever needed, but I was hoping that it had changed where it wasn't quite as much.
Well, they don't understand that if they cut their own nose off, they might have to be sitting on a stool. And we all know that they're not particularly, most of them are not particularly interested in that. So, but they don't have a Jeremy like you to see the big picture for them sometimes. So, Betty, let's go back, and we've talked about the history just a little bit. Why don't you just tell us what's the status of nurse anesthesia education today?
Well, as Mike mentioned earlier, they're all going to be at the doctoral level by 25, graduate with a doctoral degree by 25. Again, we're the first specialty in nursing to do so, to mandate it. I think that's something. I had talked with Polly Bednash that we mentioned earlier. As a matter of fact, we were at a meeting and she came up to me and said, I cannot believe that you have gone ahead, meaning the profession, and approved a mandated doctoral degree for your graduates. She says, when you were just seemed to be against it in all the meetings, because you know how nurse anesthetists are, where you're going to have to convince us that once we make up our mind, we're on our way. And I think that certainly sums up how we are. I said, you know how we are, Polly. We've got to really look at all angles, but when we make up our mind, it's the right thing to do. And I thought when we were talking, I recall that in very early 90s, 91 or 92, before AACN even started, the ANA did have a task force appointed to look at the possibility of a doctoral degree. So we actually were ahead of that. We decided, I was on SAP, but they decided at that time it was not the time. But then by the time AACN was pushing, we had already done some work. So that was a good thing. So we've come a long way. When I became director in 1990, schools were closing all over the place. We got down to, I think, 82 or 80 programs from the 200 and some that were there. 68 programs closed it was just really, really bad. And again, that's behind us. I had to do with direct reimbursement and the doctor's challenge, not allowing us in clinical sites in some instances. And I think one thing that there was and they took action. They had a commission on nurse anesthesia education that was diverse, and they had a lot of good ideas. They hired staff and actually were able to turn it around. But it got really bad. I mean, I was afraid they were all going to close before it was over. But today we're stable. I think the movement into universities, we saw that as a safe harbor because we were in hospitals and we were under the thumb essentially of anesthesiologists. So the movement, I was worried at the time, but I think moving into universities has really helped give us some safety. So it's changed a lot, but I think we've got a really bright future, putting out really, really smart people. And, they're doing things I never dreamed of doing when I graduated from school. It's wonderful.
Yeah, they are definitely smart people coming out today. I mean, the types of students that we interact with all the time just blow me away at how smart and articulate that these folks are. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there, Betty.
Yeah,
well, as we try to kind of conclude here, Mike, any concluding thoughts you want to kind of get across to our listeners?
Your quote earlier, Jeremy, I think bears repeating. I wish I could remember the original source, but those who fail to learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. And so we have a rich history, and I would strongly encourage people to look back on what they had in their professional issues content in school. The imaging, Imagining in Time series in the journal is a great source of some of that historic information. And on a lighter note, I would say when I was first trained as a COA reviewer by the late Dr. Norman Wolford, one of his takeaway points for us was, you'll go on some visits where you may want to have a cab waiting outside after you give your exit report. And I filed that away. And sure enough, I was on a visit like that before I was on the council, and I asked the admin for the school, please have a cab waiting. It was before, rideshare. And so we did our report. And as we were leaving, I was fully expecting to get into a cab, and there was no cab.
Whoops.
She had been directed by the program administrator, no cab. We'll take them to the airport. And fortunately, they didn't drive us off a cliff.
Fortunately, that's right. That's right. Well, Mike, to your point a minute ago, I think that a lot of people, Winston Churchill said that, but I don't think that he was the original person, if I remember right. So, but I think he used that from someone else. So, hey, Betty, any concluding thoughts?
No, not at all. I really thank you for this opportunity and hope that people enjoy some of the history. We certainly enjoyed looking at what was there and all the evidence of our great people that preceded us.
Yeah, well, you guys are both two great leaders in this industry, and our listeners, I'm sure, will be thrilled to hear your voice in this regard, and this is something that will be out there forever to kind of memorialize where we came from in this industry. So, Sharon, you want to add anything else?
It's a wrap.